So I have good news to share. Over Shabbos, my wife Chaya and I became the lucky parents of a baby girl. So I actually pre-programmed my phone. I put in the Uber app, I put in the address. You could set the address as like a favorite. So I already had the address, and I had the number of the midwife or the doctor on file. I took all my children to my brother, who lives a few blocks away, deposited them there. They was all still sleeping. I just put them down there, and they knew what to do with them, I hope. And we were actually scheduled to eat out. We got invited out for lunch. I stopped off by our neighbor who invited us out and told him, okay, we're not going to be coming. He actually gave me some food. So we had some food to take with us. We had prepared some bags to take along the way, like bug out bags, like survivalists, ready to go at a moment's notice. The rabbi told us that it's ideal when you're having a baby on Shabbos. Of course, the Talmud already says that, all the laws of Shabbos are overridden in a case of a potential life-saving situation, of course. And therefore, there's no problem to get in the car, turn in your car, drive to the hospital, no problem. But anything that you could avoid, you have to avoid. It means the only things that must be overridden can be overridden. The things that you shouldn't just go check the sports on your phone, right? You shouldn't just check your emails, right? Things that you need to do, you need to do. Things you don't need to do, well, then you can't do. So the rabbi said, okay, if you drive, then you have to give your car to the valet, because if you turn off the car, well, then there's a fire and you're extinguishing the fire. That's a problem. So you give it to the valet, and then that's what you would need to do. Give it to the valet. So that would be if we were to drive. But ideally, the best thing now is Uber, because with Uber, someone else is driving. And therefore, the only things that you're going to be doing are, summoning it, which is it a question? It's probably not of biblical severity to summon the Uber. So we got the Uber, and I had the Uber driver open the door. Now, there actually is one issue that I had to avoid, and that is carrying, because they open the door, okay, but then I have these bags, and in our neighbor, there's an Eruv, meaning there's a halachic device that in effect turns the entire neighborhood into one domain, and therefore carrying within the domain is not a problem. But we're driving to the medical center in Houston, and you need to carry your items from the outside, from the curb into the building. You're transferring from one domain to another domain. That's a problem. It might be even one as severe as one of the 39 principles, 39 categories of work. It's a somewhat of a inside baseball question as to exactly is it considered, is it not considered the full severity? But so I had the Uber driver take the bags into the actual hospital and deposit it there. I'm thinking, as the whole time, I'm thinking like this driver must think that we're total jerks. Ask them to open the door and asking them to carry our stuff. But we were going to the Texas Children Women's Pavilion with a quite visually clear pregnant woman, and the woman, the driver, she did indicate that it seems like she knew what was happening. So she was very understanding, but, listen, you gotta do what you gotta do. After Shabbos, I did go to my phone. I did give her a 5-star review, and I did give her a $5 tip. I figured that was fair. So we get to the, 9th floor, whatever it is, and you gotta sign in. Now, actually signing in, the Talmud makes it clear, writing 2 letters on Shabbos, that's a biblical prohibition. So I understand you have to go to the hospital, but do you need to sign in? So we asked the security guy, and he's like, yeah, sure, I'll sign for you. He just writes it in. You don't need to write. Let the non-Jew, let him write it. No problem. So he wrote it for us, and they opened up all the doors for us. And the security guard was actually he was very curious about it, because he said that in his position, he's meeting all these people from all these different kinds of religions and all these different backgrounds. And to him, he's fascinating and so curious by it. And, consequently, so he was asking all these questions. What could you do? What can't you do? Are you allowed to eat on Shabbos? He's like, boy, you should see what we eat on Shabbos. But he was, He was very curious, very inquisitive, and so he signed that for us, no problem. Now, actually, later on, there was one thing that we had to sign. That my wife actually had to sign the waiver for the anesthesia so that they won't let you sign. But actually, the Talmud makes it clear. This is again cool stuff that don't usually play out every week. If someone is forced to do a biblical prohibition, there's ways to mitigate it. How so? So to actually transgress a biblical prohibition, an act has to have certain components to it. And part of that is doing it in the normal fashion. Whereas if someone does it in an oblique fashion or unusual fashion, that would kind of downgrade it from a biblical prohibition to a rabbinic prohibition. And that's kind of the theme. The theme is you do whatever you can to make sure that everything goes normal, but you don't need to do anything more than is necessary. So Chaya took the pen in her left hand, did the initials 3 times, and signed her name, also with the left hand. And it's interesting because the anesthesiologist, actually is like, "Are you a lefty?" I must have looked kind of awkward. But she's like, whatever. We kind of downplayed it, but it's interesting, like how it's such a different experience. And then finally you're there and your children are home and they have no idea what's going on. I'm sure they're curious. They're right. They're kind of nervous. It's hours. We left them at 9:00 and Shabbos is over at 8:40 or something like that, or 8:30. I didn't even know exactly. I didn't check ahead of time. So 8:30, 8:40, it's 12 hours and they don't know what's happening. And of course you have family, my parents in New York and my in-laws in Canada. They don't know what's happening. And they don't even know that they should know that there's something happening. We actually have our phones with us. And all of these nurses, and of course there's a whole cavalcade of nurses and people coming in the whole time. And then finally baby's born. Baby took a while to come out. But around 5 PM, baby's born. And then they're there patching her eyes, they say in Yiddish, tending to the baby. And then the nurse says, "Do you have a camera?" I assume that this child set the record for the longest lifespan being unphotographed. Because you imagine, everyone was always on their phones and taking pictures and sent, right? I said to her, "No, we don't have a camera." She's like, "Okay." I told one of the nurses that says, "We're waiting for the bids to come in from People and Us Weekly." Who's going to have the first, she thought it was pretty funny. That was already after Shabbos was over, so about to make all the phone calls. And we didn't explain to everyone what was happening. I guess if you look at me, I was kind of dressed the way I am right now. I guess you could figure that there's some sort of religious persuasion there. But I don't know if people even know. It's Saturday, it's Shabbos, and people are Shabbos observant. But yeah, so the baby's born around 5, and then we were just there, just enjoying Shabbos. I brought a book of Talmud with me. I was able to study 5 pages of Talmud. I did not bring, sadly, I should have thought of this. I did not bring a Chumash because I wasn't able to read the Parsha because I didn't have any. And it's like in Israel, every hospital, there's tons of Jewish books. And there's my other son was born on Shabbos in Jerusalem, in Shari Tzedek Hospital. There's a shul, in the floor below. And there's kosher food and there's everything, right? So I went to the shul and he got an aliyah, you actually name the child because you're supposed to traditionally we name the child when the father gets an aliyah, that's an opportunity to name a child. And a baby boy, of course, is named at the bris, a baby girl is named, some other time, but traditionally it's done with an aliyah. So I was thinking if there was a minyan somewhere nearby, I could have gone over and, gotten an aliyah, but, we're stranded in this place. And then finally we wait for Shabbos is over and Shabbos is over. Call parents, call in-laws, check up on the kids. The kids were dancing. They were so excited. They were just overjoyed. And then Shabbos was over and everyone's comfortable in their rooms. And I took an Uber back and picked up the kids. They were exhausted. They woke up early and they were running around the whole day, and brought them home, put them to sleep, and I get back. I'm gonna take the kids over to the hospital, and when my daughter Miriam was born, I told my boys who were little, it was Akiva was, I don't know, 4 and Shua was 2 little kids, I told him, I said, okay, you cannot imagine what happened. When the Almighty sent this girl down, he brought gifts for her 2 older brothers. And I pulled out, as if she was holding it, I pulled out two lollipops. And they remember this thing and like, we know it was really you who did it. We know. I said, what? How would you think that? She brought it because she knew she had 2 big brothers. So that's my plan to do it again. So, and the big kids, of course, know that it's all a game. It's all, they know that, so on the way back, I'm going to stop off and get some lollipops. And I'll say, listen, I told the kids when I got home, I said, you cannot imagine what she brought with her. And they're like, oh, we know. we know your shtick already. Yeah, they know. But they're like, yeah, it's interesting that only the girls bring it. I said they're more nurturing. What could you do? So anyhow, so I was going to do a class on a primer on Pesach. What I ultimately opted to do is something a little bit germane to the subject of having new babies. And it's also one of the themes of Pesach, and that is the 4 sons. As we know, one of the highlights of the Haggadah, or one of the themes of Pesach in general, is the idea of conveying the story of the Exodus to your children. And if you actually examine the Torah, you'll find that there are 4 different times, there's 4 different verses that describe a dialogue between parent and child related to Pesach. When your child asks you, why are we doing Pesach? You tell them because of the Exodus. But that's recorded 4 times, 3 times in the book of Exodus and once in the book of Deuteronomy. And of course, our sages tell us that if you look at these 4 dialogues, there's nuance between the exact methodology of how this message is conveyed. And the obvious answer, and like we read in the Haggadah, is that there's 4 different kinds of children. You know, they say there's 4 character types. The Myers-Briggs. So we have 4 sons, and this is in the Haggadah. So essentially this is Jewish wisdom that goes back thousands of years, because the Haggadah, even it's not so clear when it was written, but it's definitely more than 1,000 years old, and it's probably around 1,800 years old, the formulation of the Haggadah. And the fact that Torah gives us 4 different dialogues between parents and children regarding the Pesach story, that teaches us that there's 4 different kinds of conversations that we could have. And the Haggadah tells us there's 4 kinds of children, 4 sons: the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the son that does not know how to ask. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that children are different. And consequently, we have to tailor our pedagogical information and relationship to the unique, particular nature of the child. So certain children, if you do one kind of educational methods, it will click, it will resonate, it will work. That same exact methodology to a different child, it just won't work. And I have one of my children, and the school tells them, listen, our school is designed for one kind of child that your son is not. And therefore, every day is a challenge. And, you know, if you're in a classroom, there can only be one teacher, right? Maybe you can have one teacher per child, but that's not efficient. And there has to be kind of one sort of modality that the education is being conveyed in. And you have different children, and certainly in a place like Houston that has, 1 or 2 different suitable schools for our kind of family, you kind of have to take what you get. And there isn't much specialization that's available. But here we see that certainly with a parent, certainly with something which is so important, like the Pesach story, we have to make sure this one don't mess up. This one don't just do cookie cutter approach. This information is so critical, you have to know how to give it to the child. And you have to know what child you got. And you have to know, therefore, how to convey the message to the child. So I think it's interesting to pursue kind of a study of these four children in general, but also the general idea that's being conveyed here. So let's frame it like this. In the Shema, of course, one of the highlights of the Jewish days, recitation of the Shema, it talks about parents and children. You should teach the words of Torah to your children. They should speak about them. You should teach it them when you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you're traveling, etc. Again, we're told what we're supposed to teach our children Torah. That's the mitzvah. In fact, the Talmud says that parents teach a child Torah. And how do we know that? Well, it quotes the verse in Deuteronomy. It says your parent has to teach a child Torah. So let me ask you a question. Aren't there different kinds of children? Yeah, I read the Haggadah. There's 4 kinds of children. So we should have 4 separate verses regarding the wise child. How do you teach them? Regarding the wicked child. How do you teach them? Regarding the child that's simple, the one that does not know how to ask. All the different kinds of children, we should be getting a different verse. How can we get this? Teach your children Torah. Okay. My theory is that the reason why on Pesach, and with respect to the Pesach story, we are told 4 verses for 4 different children and unique, subtle differences to tailor the message to the child, that's because that is a means. That is how you get to the goal. Whereas in the Shema, when it talks about the relationship we have with our children, that's not the means, that's the goal itself. And what I'm suggesting is that the Torah is telling us that we have a goal with all of our children. All the different varieties and stripes. However, the varieties and stripes will determine which avenue, which path we take to get towards that same goal. And in the Shema, we're told what the goal is. And on Pesach, we're told how to get to that goal. And therefore, they're complementary. One is what you need to do to get to the goal. And one is, if you do what you need to do, you will arrive at this goal. And that's the goal, which is the uniform goal for all your children. Now, I want to stress that this is not to imply that every child has to be identical and every child has to be like a robot. We don't believe in that. We don't believe that children should be programmed like machines to just follow instructions and not have a mind of their own. But when the Torah says that children should live a robust spiritual life, when the Torah tells us that children should live a robust spiritual life, they should have Torah involved with them at every stage of their life, that's not saying that they all should be the same. They're just saying they should all have rich spiritual lives, and that's your goal as a parent, to enrich your children and to guide them and to position them to succeed and hopefully arrive at that satisfactory conclusion. So the goal is presented to the Shema. So what do we read in the Shema? So if you look at the Ramban, there's a famous Ramban on education. And he says that if he contrasts the first paragraph of the Shema with the second paragraph of the Shema. The first paragraph of the Shema says you should thoroughly teach your children and you should speak the words of Torah to your children. So it seems like it's a very direct relationship, a direct transaction. Parent directly speaks to the child words of Torah. The second paragraph of the Shema says you should teach the Torah to them, to your sons, so that they should speak it. So again, it begins, teach the words of Torah to your children. But then it adds, so that they should speak in it. And that's not a direct transaction parent to child. There, the children are speaking on it on their own. So what he's explaining here is that the goal is not that you be a helicopter parent, as they say, always hovering over your children, having their apron strings connected to you at all times, and therefore the kid cannot flourish on their own. The goal is that whatever you do is going to kind of kickstart them to be able to flourish on their own. Of course, there's the analogy of the bicycle, right? You hold a little bit, let them ride it. But if you're always holding it, they'll never be able to flourish on their own. They'll never spread their wings. They'll never become their independent person. My grandfather used to always convey the analogy, you have a candle, and that's the parent. And then you have another candle, which is unlit. And the goal of parenting and education is to touch the two wicks. That way the fire can transfer from the lit candle to the unlit candle. But then once that's done, the parent, so to speak, can withdraw and the child can remain lit on their own. So that's the same thing here. We see that the parent is initially, first paragraph of the Shema is teaching the child. And that's a direct transactional relationship with respect to Torah. And then the second paragraph, the child is flourishing on their own. They're speaking the words of Torah on their own. And that seems like that's the goal of parenting. The Hebrew word for parenting and for education in general is chinuch. Chinuch. And I believe the first time that word appears in the Torah, it appears in chapter 14, verse 14 of Genesis. Vayarak es chanichav. And it appears in somewhat of an unusual location. It's talking about with Abraham is in the middle of a war. He's somehow involved. There's a war of 4 kings against 5 kings. And then his nephew / brother-in-law is his cousin is kidnapped. Lot is kidnapped. Then he has to get involved. But he arms his household to go partake in the war. And the way it is described, he mobilizes his forces, but the forces are his students, we're told. 318 students. And they're called chanichav, his students, his charges, his proteges. And Rashi there gives us a definition of what this word means. What does the word chinuch mean? So Rashi explains that the word chinuch, which of course by us means education, but here it's used in a different context, it's the initiation, it's the entry of a person or a vessel into the future that they're destined to stay in. So the first step of something or someone in a future that they're going to remain in, that is chinuch. It's not about information. I think today there's the concept of education and information have been helplessly entangled. That we think that the goal of schooling is to learn things. Now, of course, it's important to learn things, but it's more important to become things. You know, I always say that I'm an autodidact. I kind of learn on my own, and I think that's the best skill. Like you give the man a fish, and they eat for a day, and you teach them to fish, and they eat forever. Right? Is that the line? Our schools, again, not all schools are like that, but in general, the idea of coming to school and having someone speak about a subject to children who are not interested in listening, that is about giving the kids fish, giving them information. But if you really want to educate them, you have to teach them how to learn. And once they learn that skill, then whatever they want to learn, they can learn. Everything is available to them. You give them the skills, you initiate them into what you want them to become. And once they become that, then you don't need to constantly feed them. Because if you need to constantly feed them, then once you leave, then the information probably never actually entered in one ear or out the other, or even it hurtles over their ears from one side of their cranium to the other. That's what happens. But if you kind of train a child into a way that they on their own can flourish, that's the goal. Again, like the candle that's lit on its own, you touch it, and that's the relationship is to ignite this passion, this appreciation of learning of spiritual matters. You do that, the kid's lit, and then they can flourish on their own, even if the parent is withdrawn. And therefore, the Torah is telling us that, in the Shema, it's telling us this is what you're responsible to do with your child. You're a link in a chain that began by Abraham, and it's this unbroken chain of parent to child, and you have a responsibility. It's one of your existential, fundamental roles as a human to pass that on to your child. And, in the paragraph, it talks about the most important things, loving God and believing God, and God is one. It puts this up there on that pedestal. That's your responsibility. And that's the goal. And then we come to Pesach, and we're told how to do it. How to do it. Not all candles are created equal. Some candles need to be lit this way, and some need to be lit that way. And some of them, you kind of have to work really, really hard, and some of them come already like it's half lit. It arrives half lit, you just need to blow it a little bit, and it could kind of take off on its own. And that's what we're told on Pesach. And it's maybe this is maybe the next level to understand, like, why is Pesach the festival that we're told how to educate, and the rest of the year we're told what the goal is? Maybe that's an advanced question. Maybe the answer is because, this is the beginning of it all. The beginning of our tenure as a Jewish nation is, of course, the Exodus. And maybe at the beginning, you have to know how to do it. Maybe I'm spitballing here. That's a theory. But it is interesting that we see this emphasis on how to do it and how to tailor on Pesach. We know that there is a critical verse in Scripture in the book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 6. Chanoch, same word, chanoch, which means educate. Chanoch lanar al pi darko, gam ki yaztin lo yasur mimena. This is the fundamental verse about education. Train, educate a child as per his way, so that also when he gets old, he will not depart from it. There's 2 points of it. A, there is instruction, and B, there is prediction. Instruction is educate the child as per his way. He has this way. He has that way. She has a third way. Every child has their own way. And therefore, make sure you put them on their own way. Don't try to jam or shoehorn the square peg in the round hole. Don't try to force someone to do something which they're not suited for, because that's not good education. And the verse acknowledges it's quite possible that you'll have moderate success in the short term. You will have success in the short term. You know why? Because you got police power. You're intimidating. You're the parent, after all. The child loves you. The child wants to listen to you. But it's not actually clicking at their base, most fundamental level, because it's unnatural for them. And therefore, you're sending a child in a path that's unnatural for you. You're going to try to override their inherent character type. It's not going to work. They're going to veer back to their own character type, and they're bereft of education. If you line the trees, so to speak, of this road with robust spirituality, and you put the child on that road, but really they're supposed to be on a different road, they eventually will veer back to their road, and they'll find it denuded of the spiritual efforts that you worked so hard to cultivate, because you made this mistake of, I would say, paving the wrong road or cultivating the wrong path. So yes, educate the child as per his way, so that when they get old, they will revert back to the thing that's more natural. Hopefully then they'll still have the impact of your hard work. This is a major theme of Jewish life, certainly of Jewish parenting, that when we train our children, it should be in a way that is suitable for their particular set of circumstances and gifts and character types and traits. And doing it in a way that's unnatural for them will not yield long-term positive results. And that's what the idea was in the Shema. The idea is the parents working, but the eventual goal is the child studies Torah on their own, even the parent's not involved. The parent's in a different city, the parent is in a different room, the parent's deceased, whatever it is, the child's candle is burning brightly. So that's the goal And the way to do it is to do it in a way that's tailored to the particular nature of the child. And on Pesach, we find out that there are 4 different child types. Number 1, the wise one. Number 2, the wicked one. Number 3, the simple one. And number 4, the child does not know how to ask. So these are 4 different character types that we see. And we also see how to identify what those character types are. And we also see how to respond to them. So it's an amazing lesson in a very short part of the Haggadah. And of course, it's based upon the verses in the Torah that show us both the tools of diagnosing the particular kind of child that you've got, and also how to tailor your message that it will resonate with that particular child. So let's start with the wise child. I think on one hand, the wise child is the easiest one to deal with. They just want to learn. They just want to behave. They call it the textbook child. They want to read. They want to learn. They're interested. And the only scarcity is on the point of the teacher. So that's what makes it really hard. Because if you want to teach the child, but you don't know much, well, then how are you going to teach a child? I would say today's schools are probably oriented around trying to teach wise sons. Why? Because the factor that's most prevalent in the educational conveyance is information. And if a kid wants to learn, it's great. It's a utopia because they're just giving them information. Hopefully there's good teachers and there's good books and there's a way for them to learn. And that's it. There's no friction. There's no problem. The kid wants to learn. There's someone who wants to teach. Just give them the information and watch them flourish. They want to learn. They want to grow. They want to flourish. Great. Is it better to have a large classroom with a lot of kids or a small classroom with few kids? I would say it depends. If it's wise children, fewer kids. Kids want to learn. More kids, more distractions. Eliminate the noise. Let them study. You have some of the other kids, they want to play. They're not interested in learning. They want to space out. They want to doodle. They want to eat snacks in class. That's what they want to do. And if there's fewer kids, there's more attention. Some kids need less attention. They just need to be able to be kids. And if you try to push them too hard, what you're doing, you're pushing them to the wrong lane, right? You're pushing them into the wrong path. That's a problem. So they need a big classroom with lots of noise and lots of chaos, and they could just hide in the corner and do their stuff. Whether it is read the book that they want, that's not the same book that we're studying here. Oh, okay. Or let them doodle, let them make pictures, right? They need that, and forcing them to a different, right? It's not natural. And again, you're going against the nature of the child, and that's what we're told here to avoid by King Solomon. So the first son is the wise son. The wise son needs to, the problem is not the child. The child's ready to go, perfectly primed to study, and it's only a question of how much could you teach them. It's not about pedagogical deftness or cleverness. It's about how much teaching ability do you have, how much capability do you have, how much are you going to convey to the child so that they could flourish. And then we read about the wicked son. And the wicked son seems like he's a really bad guy. He's called the wicked one. But what's so bad about what he says? So we read in the Haggadah that he says, what are you guys doing? And he seems to kind of be disincluding himself from the public. He seems to be trying to alienate himself from everyone else. This is something you're doing. This is not something that I am doing. He is being recalcitrant. But it's also interesting that he doesn't do it in a overt way. It's really interesting here. He doesn't say, I'm not interested in what you're doing. He says, what are you guys doing? It's kind of like subtle. Like if we would meet this child, we would never call him wicked. We wouldn't. Yet the Haggadah calls him wicked. Shouldn't we not be labeling our children, right? Doesn't that seem a little bit, I don't know, doesn't that rub us the wrong way that he's being labeled as, what was his crime? My goodness. Did he do something so terrible? He just asked a simple question, innocent question. What are you doing? So in what area do we need to focus on? We're told he's wicked, right? Yet he doesn't seem to do anything wrong. There is a term of wickedness in Jewish literature when someone hasn't done anything wrong. But it's used to highlight the flaw. Now, again, the flaw with the wise child is only with respect to the teacher. Kid's ready to go. There's nothing to stop. There's no headwinds the child's facing. The headwinds is, can you teach him enough? Can you give him enough to satisfy him? Here, the wicked son, quote unquote, I think everyone would agree, is probably not intellectually incapable. Maybe he's the most capable. He has all the tools. There's just some resistance, something raw about the child that they're unwilling to listen, or that they view it at a distance. They're not willing to commit. It's not that they can't, they could. It's not that they don't have the attention span they have. It's that they're scared to jump in. And they're scared to apply to themselves. They're insecure about what's being conveyed here. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you an analog to this. There's someone else in Jewish literature that is simultaneously, this is why it's so interesting, called a tzaddik, which means a righteous person, and simultaneously called a rasha, a wicked person. And by conventional understanding, those two are opposites. It's oxymoronic. You can't be both. You have to be only one. And those people are a set of people in the book of Numbers. These are the spies, the scouts that were sent to scout out the land. If you look at chapter, I don't know what it is exactly, 12 or 13 of Numbers, you look at Rashi. Rashi says, within a few verses, they're righteous, they're wicked. Tzaddik, rasha. And how's that even possible? Those are opposites. So I think if you look at exactly what is their wickedness, you maybe find the answer. Rashi says that the end of Parshas Bahalosa, the previous parsha, tells the story of Miriam speaking negatively about her brother. She gets tsaras, and she's put outside the camp, and everyone has to wait for 7 days till she heals before they can move on. The very next episode is the episode of the spies. It says Rashi, these people are a rasha. They're a Rishaim. They're wicked. Why? Because they saw what happened to Miriam, and they didn't take the lesson to heart. They didn't apply it to themselves. They didn't absorb it. They saw it. They should have learned. They didn't. Again. And then a few verses later, a few comments later, actually says, Ba'osashat tzadikim. At that time, they were tzadikim. They were righteous. What he means is that they were in the realm of action, in the realm of ideology, they were righteous. But they had a certain resistance to applying the lessons that they learned to themselves. They saw Miriam, they saw her illness, they understand why it happened, but they didn't take that final mile. They said, it's not for me, it's for someone else. They didn't apply it to themselves. That was their wickedness. Yes, it's only a small part of the collective arsenal of character, and in general they were righteous, but this was their flaw. Their flaw was their lack of self-application. And I think what we can say with the wicked son, that's the same thing that we're talking about over here. It's not like he's evil. It's not called the evil son. It's called the wicked son, the rasha. Maybe it's the same thing. There's nothing wrong with them per se. What they need is to find a way to overcome this challenge. They're not willing to, they're dissociating themselves. They're saying, this is for you, not for me. Again, they're not willing to apply it to themselves. I definitely think this is one of the maybe the most important steps of personal growth is learning how to not be this kind of rasha. Learning how to apply things to yourself. Because someone can be the most wise and gifted and studious and assiduous scholar, but if they don't take the lessons to heart, it doesn't change them. If it doesn't change them, they stay the way they are. Maybe they even get worse because they had all the tools and they should have learned and they didn't. So what is the way to remedy this wicked son's recalcitrance? So the Talmud says something very interesting. Talmud says that the verse that talks about teaching the wicked son, it says, "V'higadeta lebincha bayamahu." You should tell your son on that day. The word "v'higadeta," the word Haggadah, means to say, to tell over. But there's another word called amirah, which means also to say. So the Talmud asks, why does it use the term "v'higadeta"? You should tell your son. It should have said "ve'amarta." You should say your son in a more traditional use of the words. Says the Talmud that the reason why it uses this word is because the word Haggadah connotes the term Agada. Agada means very interesting things. And it says when you convey the message to your son, you say it in a way that pulls the heartstrings like Agadata. Which means you couch it in a way that's very pleasant and very attractive to them. I think what this is the first thing that we read about over here is that it's not just about what you're conveying to your child. It's also about how you're conveying it to your child. It should be done in a very pleasant way that is conducive to influencing them, because you have to realize that there's some resistance that's material, that's real, and you have to kind of navigate that. And one of the ways that you do that is you're trying to tug at their heartstrings, right? You have these little strings, you got to pull at them, because you try to grab the whole thing, it's not going to work. You got to use pleasantness and be crafty in how you try to reach out to this child. On one hand. On the other hand, the child also needs a bit of criticism. Because after all, there's something there that's corrupt. So what is the criticism that a child is told? So if you read the Haggadah, it says, you tell him, because of this did God do to me when I left Egypt. He's like, well, what's Pesach all about for you? And you say, because of this, God did this to me when I left Egypt. So how's that criticism? Doesn't sound like it's criticism. So the idea here is, first of all, their recalcitrance is subtle, and therefore the criticism is also subtle. He says, I'm not part of this. But he doesn't say it like that. He says, why are you doing Pesach? Most of us, if we would hear that, we're like, okay, he's just asking a simple question. But the Haggadah is telling you that there's some degree of dissociation. It's you, it's not me. So what do you say? Oh, is that what you want? Oh, okay. This Pesach is because God did this for me. And again, you're subtly dissociating him. It's like when the kids say, like, why do the neighbors have this bike, and why do they have it? Oh, okay. You want to move into them? Should I call them up? You want to move into them? You sure? Are you sure you want this? So first you reach out with pleasantness, and then you say, okay, are you sure you want that? Do you really want to be on your own? Of course not. Of course not. But do you really want it? Of course not. No, you don't want that. But it means you're actually playing out what he wants to its natural extension, right? You say, okay, so let's take this road that you're proposing. You want to be on your own? Okay. Let me give you what you want and see if you really like it. Sometimes you realize that maybe you didn't want it. So first you make sure that you're a friend. You're pleasant. You tug at their heartstrings, and then you say to them, okay, this is what you wanted. I'm going to criticize you, but not in a overt way, only in the same manner that you did. But I'm also going to play out this story in the way that you are formulating it. You want it like this? Okay, let's look at the natural extensions of that approach and see if you actually like it, because you probably really won't like it. But again, all done pleasantly and all done subtly. And that's a way you're navigating very deftly around the problem of the child's recalcitrance, and that will hopefully make them reconsider and actually buy in. Thirdly, we read about the simple son. And what's the simple son? What does he say? He says, Mazos. What is this? So he's asking a very unsophisticated question. So Rashi on the Torah, Rashi tells us that this is a silly child, an unsophisticated child. Doesn't know how to ask questions deeply, and just asks general questions What's this? And what's the answer? See, look at the answer. It's a very beautiful answer. You tell the child, with a strong hand did God take us out of the land of Egypt from the house of slaves. So you're, in effect, encapsulating the story of the Exodus in a sentence. But if you notice, like, you're highlighting some portions of the story. With a strong hand, you're adding some color to it. This was very impressive. This was miraculous. God took us out from Egypt, from the house of slavery. Not just from Egypt. You embellish the story in a way that is going to be evocative for the child. Don't just give them the information. They don't want, the laws, that doesn't work. You need to inspire them. You need to entertain them. It needs to be a story format. You have to put in little bits of, little vignettes, little anecdotes. Embellish the story in a way that interests them. The wise child, that doesn't excite them, doesn't titillate them. They want to know, okay, detail, laws, complex. They want to get into the nitty gritty of the advanced learning. This child, they're simple. They need to be first awakened. They need to be entertained. They need to be inspired. And therefore, what do? You tell them the story. It's the same message, but again, it's tailored to who they are, what kind of child they are. Impress them. Show them some fireworks, and they'll be excited. And finally, you have the child who does not know how to ask. And in that case, he asks no questions. And such a child, you need to prod, and you have to goad them into getting involved. This Pesach is so important. They can't just sit in the sidelines. Normally, they just sit back, they don't ask questions. Not today. Today, even if you don't have questions, okay, I'm going to prod you. I'm going to push some buttons to awaken interest, to awaken maybe questions. It's so important. Even when the child is not inquisitive, they're not resistant, they're not recalcitrant, they're not totally absorbing everything you're telling you. They're not even asking the simple questions. They're not asking anything. Well, okay, it's your job to initiate. You have to talk to them, and you have to tell them those messages.
Could it be that child is just...
Now it's interesting. If you read the Connection of the Four Sons, it seems like it starts going right away to a different topic. It says, maybe you may think that this starts from Rosh Chodesh, meaning that this starts 2 weeks before Pesach. Pesach is on the 15th, so the first day of the month. That's what you would maybe think. Therefore, it says, the verse tells us, on that day, meaning the day of the Exodus. Well, maybe it's the entire day. No, it says, Ba'avur zeh, because of this, the only time that you're supposed to tell the children, or the time that you're specifically supposed to tell the children about Pesach is, about the Exodus, is when there's matzah and maror in front of you. So this seems like it's a totally unrelated subject. There's a mitzvah of telling your children about the story of the Exodus, and you may have thought that it's a month, it's a half a month earlier, or maybe it's the whole day. No, tell you that it's right now. It's during the Seder. So it seems like it's unrelated to the previous narrative of 4 sons. I think maybe we could say that it's related. You have a son doesn't ask. So what are you going to do? You're going to prod them. You're going to encourage them to get involved. How are you going to do that? So if you just take your kid out and say, okay, time to talk about Pesach. 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 Exodus. What Exodus? You tell them, no. Today, right now, as we are sitting here right now, this is what was happening. And here's the matzah. And you pull the matzah. And you use these visual cues, these visual aids. You're bringing the story to life. This very expensive, very sawdusty matzah was what our grandparents ate. Could you imagine? Look at this maror. First of all, it looks like bricks. And it tastes terrible. Bitter. Makes you cry. This is what they were going through. And God took us out. So fast. Can you imagine gathering 1 million people in 10 minutes and ferreting them out of Egypt? So much so that the dough didn't even rise. And they were able to bake it subsequently. Look at that. Look at this. Could you imagine? Take them to a matzah bakery. You know how powerful a matzah bakery is? You see what? It's a wild place. Because again, you have 18 minutes and 18 minutes only. Once 18 minutes is over, you got to get a new factory. So you have how much matzah can you bake in 18 minutes? And you see the frenetic pace of what's going on there. It's really intense. And that's what we have to do to prevent it from rising. That's what the Jewish people were doing. They were just running out of Egypt. And again, this is all part of your message. Such a child, the child doesn't know how to ask. You need to be the one who initiates. How do you do that? Well, here you go. It's today, timely, topical. You have these incredible aids to help you pick up the matzah. See this matzah? This is what they ate. Why did they eat this matzah? Who would want to eat this? Why are we paying so much money for this? It's because they were leaving so fast. And what they come from, they left from this terrible place with the maror. Again, you're contrasting. We were in a house of slaves in the land of Egypt, and God took us out with the outstretched arm. And again, this is a very impressionable moment this night with all its trappings and all its symbolism and all its power. This is the time to get all the children the messages they need to hopefully develop and deepen their faith. And again, each message conveyed to each child in their own way, in a way that resonates with them, to be able to hopefully take that inspiration, take that faith, and that will not only influence them throughout the whole year, certainly on Pesach, but throughout the whole year. But really, this could be foundational for their lives as Jews throughout their lifetimes. And it's important. This is the one thing you can't mess up. You got to know what kind of child you got, and you got to convey the message in a way that really connects to the kind of child that the Almighty gave you. But the goal is, whichever child you get, every child has a way to reach them. I heard an idea this past year when we were reading Parshas Chayesara, which is in the book of Genesis, so the fifth parsha of the Torah. It talks about Keturah. Keturah was Abraham's second wife after Sarah died. Rashi tells us the Keturah is actually a woman that we know. She's actually Hagar. So why is she called Keturah? Because her actions are as noble as Ketoras. Ketoras is the incense offering. That's what Rashi says in Chayesar. This is very odd. Hagar, wonderful, wonderful lady. Amazing. But what connection does she possibly have with Ketoras? Ketoras is the offering, the incense offering that was done in the temple multiple times a day. And it was this beautiful smell. All the various potions, all the various spices that went into it, like the Talmud, the Torah delineates all the various spices. But what does Hagar have to do with Ketoras? Doesn't seem like there's any connection. I heard an amazing idea that we know Hagar is the mother of Ishmael. Can you imagine what it's like to educate and parent Ishmael? Before he was born, the angel declared, "V'hu yihiyeh pera adam yado b'kol v'yad kol bo." He'll be a wild animal. We think we have a problem with our kids who have ADHD. This kid was a wild animal, and this is declared by the angel before he's born. There's no way to change that. And what happens at the end of his life? Well, we see at the end of his life, the Talmud tells us, Rashi brings it down, that Ishmael repented, and he became righteous. An amazing transformation, a metamorphosis. How'd that happen? So maybe the answer is like this. Just tell us, there's 11 ingredients, I believe, in the Ketoras. And the smell was so beautiful that the Talmud says that when the Ketoras was active in Jerusalem, no bride would need to put on any perfume because everything smelled so delicious, so amazing. Everything smelled so beautiful. The whole city was influenced by this amazing smell. However, the Talmud tells us that there was one ingredient called the chelbana, it's one of the spices, that had a terrible smell. But together with the cocktail of all the other stuff, it smelled beautiful. That's what Hagar did. She realized that she was given a very difficult child, Ishmael, because he has proclivities, he has character traits that are vile. And she was like Ketores. She knew which ingredients to add. She knew which buttons to push, that the collective total is beautiful. The aroma that resulted from the totality of Ishmael was he repented, he became righteous. And that's why she's called Keturah, because she was the wizard. She was the potions master that knew exactly how to deal with this problem and what other ingredients to add to make the final result very aromatic, very pleasant. That's why she's called, her actions were as noble as Keturah. But I think it's a good lesson for us. We have children, and every single human on the planet has some flaws. Because you know what? If they didn't have any flaws, they wouldn't be a human. So everyone has flaws. And everyone has, of course, good characteristics as well. As a parent's responsibility is, or their mandate is, to act like Hagar a little bit and to find the avenue, the path where that particular child, with their own particular set, collection, repertoire of character, how could this child flourish? What is the lane that I can make for this child that they could ultimately end up with that, like we see in the Shema, the robust spiritual life that's outlined there. That's hopefully the goal of all parenting and hopefully the destiny of all of our children.